Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing the new Superman movie, a very brave and relevant film. So briefly, the film follows Superman as he's lured into intervening in a war between two nations, a trap set in hopes of turning public opinion against him and paving the way for his ultimate destruction. I was very struck by how bold and unapologetic the film was regarding its commentary on war, immigration, and America's increasingly authoritarian military-industrial complex. The film works because David Corenswet is Superman. There's an honesty to him that reminded me of Christopher Reeves. The film doesn't really try to invest us in his alter ego Clark Kent, and for good reason. And I'm not really sure after Christopher Reeve anyone can really convince us. If I saw David or even Henry Cavill working at the Daily Planet, I would just automatically assume they were Superman. And I think Christopher Reeve is the only actor that had the perfect physicality and persona to perfectly embody both roles. And the film doesn't really try to improve that dynamic. The film also assumes that audiences are familiar with Superman, and so it doesn't really bother reintroducing us to him. Although Superman is presented to us as a very young man very early in his career, everything about him feels outdated and nearly expired. Superman's crisis begins when he intervenes to save the people of Jarhanpur from the brutal regime Baravia, ruled by a maniacal dictator. Conflict appears to be a thinly veiled commentary on the genocide in Palestine. Baravia is portrayed as a violent state led by an unhinged dictator that has a very uncanny resemblance to Benjamin Netanyahu. It also doesn't help that Baravia is closely aligned with the United States. Unaware of the political ramifications of his actions, Superman just wanted to save lives, intervening against the Baravian army, notorious for killing unarmed men, women, and children under the guise of self-defense and freedom. The movie is less focused on this conflict and more concerned with the growing power corporations, especially military contractors, seem to have in shaping our foreign policy. I thought Lex Luthor was perfectly depicted as an egomaniacal, selfish individual that's less concerned with the well-being of others and more concerned with maximizing his own profits by fueling wars abroad. At times, the film does feel a bit disjointed and disorganized, and it relies heavily on exposition rather than letting the story unfold naturally. And much of the topics it touches on rarely gets beneath the surface level. The only reason we know what's going on is because it continuously repeats itself using the same images over and over again, and so you always know what's going on and you know exactly what everything is referring to. However, it compensates for its lack of nuance with its very bold and confident commentary. What's shocking isn't that we're being told everything, it's what's actually being told to us and how. The movie not only introduces a lot of hot topics, but it clearly takes sides. Following Superman's intervention in this foreign conflict, he's immediately labeled a possible threat to national sovereignty, and he sparks outrage abroad. I thought Lois Lane's character and the way the movie uses the Daily Planet was really effective in showing how these conflicts and the atrocities they unleash are often overcomplicated and really ignored and downplayed for public consumption. David plays Superman with such remarkable honesty. In an effort to save lives, he finds himself on the verge of becoming public enemy number one. This movie takes place in a world where superheroes have become common. And what's crazy is Superman isn't really the most powerful being. In a lot of ways, he feels like the least powerful and the most vulnerable to death. His suit is not as high-tech or as impressive as his counterparts in the Justice Gang. The morality Superman displays feels very unrealistic and naive at times. He's constantly focused on protecting others rather than destroying and annihilating his enemies. And this is a side note, but I really enjoyed the Justice Gang, and I thought Mr. Terrific was really terrific. I felt like the Justice Gang added a much needed spark to the film, and they were utilized just enough. And I also think the Justice Gang provided a much needed contrast to someone like Superman, who really does what he does out of the love of it. The Justice Gang has really no desire to do more than they have to. They're not really willing to put themselves or their reputation at risk. They do just enough to get clicks and to stay relevant, but that's about it. The film repeatedly shows us Superman saving lives, and at first you think, okay, we get it, he's a good person. But the way that David plays him, it starts to slowly have an emotional impact, and if not an emotional impact, make his version of Superman very believable. There's no ego in this Superman. You sense no anger, just genuine care and selflessness. And I think I like the way Clark Kent naturally emerges out of Superman. Like, the film blends both personalities seamlessly. You also get the sense that everyone he works with knows that he's Superman, because this version of Superman is just not a very good liar. I mean, the minute he walks into the office, you just kind of know that he's Superman. The film makes two very powerful commentaries, one on immigration and the second on America's endless wars abroad and how these conflicts are damaging its reputation worldwide. This movie is a prime example as to why Hollywood remains America's most powerful weapon. I would argue that right now America is in a desperate need for a rebrand. It has never been viewed more negatively abroad than it has today. And I think Superman embodies the paradox of America, a nation that draws people in with the promise of making the world better, while at the same time causing and contributing to much of its suffering. And David plays Superman almost with the innocence of a small child, and he really embodies this infantilized view of America as this really hopeful place where good can be done. And even though this vision is fading, it existed and it can one day exist again. And this movie works because Superman makes you believe that this good really is this country's default setting. Now, whether or not you buy that, I leave it up to you. The film heavily emphasizes Superman's immigration status by calling him an alien. In this world, everyone knows about Superman's backstory. It's no secret. Despite his good deeds over the years, people were quick to believe the lies about him. Lies that were not only meant to destroy him, but dehumanize anyone he's ever helped or attempts to help. There's a brilliant scene where Lex Luthor is showing Superman his army of bot monkeys who spend their days and nights manipulating the algorithm to spread hate against Superman. And aside from the monkeys, it's not that far from the truth. A major twist in the film centers around Superman's origin story. His parents left him a video urging him to do good in the world. However, half that video was lost, and Superman assumes this missing part reinforces this mission. However, after Lex Luthor manages to hack Superman's safe space, they manage to decode the rest of the message, which reveals something much darker than Superman could have imagined. The second half of the video really encourages Superman to colonize and control the people of Earth, a message that totally shatters Superman's self-perception and reputation. I think Superman's internal conflict really highlights this broader commentary the film makes very well regarding the country, that while Superman always had the potential to do great things, these great things would never have been possible if he did not live in this environment and he wasn't surrounded by all these people, an environment and community that's now shunned him and basically cast him out. We don't spend much time with his family, but we spend enough time to really convince us that Superman is the way he is because of this environment he's grown up in and because of the people that he's been surrounded by. This video sparks an identity crisis in Superman, and Lex Luthor does a great job of really weaponizing his status as a foreigner to isolate him and provoke him, hoping to either destroy him or push him to destroy himself. And Superman's character has always meant to be out of place. A large part of his mission to save humanity stems from a desire to earn his place in it and to really prove that he deserves to be a part of this world. And much of his journey is really about Superman realizing that he's always been home and he's always belonged. I think the film's strongest commentary is regarding immigration because it repeatedly stresses Superman's otherness, not just to regular people without powers, but even to those with superpowers. And it makes this point to really draw your attention to this bigger picture. Without this sense of difference, the very idea of America as a force for good would just not exist. And without those differences, all that remains is a nation that prioritizes profits over people, like Lex Luthor. Superman's trust in the government and rule of law is shattered when he voluntarily turns himself in, only to be tortured and locked up in a pocket universe. And the movie doesn't really linger on this setting a lot. The prison eerily resembles a lot of these Supermax facilities being built abroad to contain anyone labeled as criminals. At one point, Lex Luthor boasts about the fact that he locked up his ex-girlfriend and some other journalists, not because they posed a threat to the society, but because they either offended him or he just didn't like them. His logic is very simple. If he can scare people enough to divide and control them, then he can do whatever he wants. And I do think the film really struggled to balance humor and drama sometimes. The subject matter is very dark, but on the other hand, you have this PG-13 rating. They really have this tough task of either pulling back a bit or really drawing everything out to you. So if you're not really following the plot, then at least you got a few laughs. Regarding Lex Luthor, at first he did annoy me. He almost feels like caricature. He's so cartoonishly diabolical, it's almost hard to take him seriously. I think what works about Lex Luthor's character is because he's so clearly out of his mind and his madness is in plain sight. His wealth has really granted him access to the highest levels of power. He desperately tries to sow fear in order to advance his own agenda. And Lex's motivations for supplying not Israel with weapons is really to carve out land for himself in order to start building his own utopia, one where he maintains complete control. To achieve this, he must eliminate Superman, if not physically, symbolically. His goal is to dismantle the very idea of Superman in order to normalize a worldview where those with the most money and the most power control the world. And Lex Luthor goes through great lengths, and I found it really interesting that the people around him just continue to kind of go along with it in hopes of benefiting from this twisted worldview. So everything about Lex Luthor, you feel like he has a cult around him. And this kind of commentary isn't really unique. However, when combined with a war that feels like it's set in the Middle East, is really extraordinary, especially considering how much this film has to lose. Visually, the film at times feels flat and almost too bright. There are moments where I'm like, I think I need sunglasses. It definitely does not have that DC look, that kind of dark, grainy look that we've come to really love. The fight scenes and the action sequences felt more fun than tense. One scene that really stood out to me was the fight between Superman and his doppelganger Lex created to kill him. Lex had memorized a bunch of combat moves hoping to kill Superman, and I thought that was very cool. Superman's dog Krypto actually didn't annoy me as much as I thought he would, and he actually ends up being a really important character. He functions as Superman's sidekick, and he offers the film enough support to move the plot along. And the same can be said for Jimmy's character at the Daily Planet and Lex Luthor's girlfriend, who recklessly takes selfies in front of sensitive information in order to hold power over Lex in case he decides to step out of line or annoy her in any way. The movie ends with Lex Luthor's demise, the US government's increasing concern over the power metahumans are possessing, and not just metahumans, but Superman's power over them and everyone else as well. I think adding this international dimension to Superman modernized the character. However, it made it very, very difficult for the film to balance world building and character development. Despite its flaws, I honestly had a wonderfully good time. I do think it deserves to be seen in IMAX. I think the film did a great job of investing us in this version of Superman. I felt very emotionally connected to him, and he completely sold me. Regardless of the misplaced humor, there were moments in this film that almost had me in tears, and maybe it's my hormones, I don't know what it is. There's a speech at the end where Superman confronts Lex Luthor about calling him an alien, and I don't know why, but that really worked for me, and I think this movie will work on a lot of different levels depending on how you're coming into it. And although the film makes way more commentaries than it has time to explore, the clarity in which it presents its opinions pretty jaw-dropping, especially considering today's political climate. You can't really make everyone happy. However, I do think this film will actually exceed its expectations, and I actually think it will do remarkably well abroad. Like, it should be interesting to see those numbers. I was pleasantly surprised. Like, as a film, could it have been better? Yes. But it really compensates for that in its clear and decisive messaging, one that will definitely leave some people either cheering or booing, depending on which how you feel. So if you've seen it, please let me know, and until next time.